For more than 70 years, global security has been underwritten by the alliance between the United States and its European partners. Since President Trump took office, those bonds have been frayed. As Nick Schifrin reports, that unraveling was on display over the weekend at the annual Munich Security Conference.
Walking into the world's premier security conference, the host was received as if she were leader of the free world. And when German Chancellor Angela Merkel took the stage, she defended the free trade the U.S. once championed.
In South Carolina, there is one of the biggest factories, no, the biggest factory for BMW, not in Bavaria. Now, all of a sudden, they are being viewed as a security threat to the United States. That shocks us.
As the audience applauds, first daughter and senior advisor Ivanka Trump stays quiet. What has shocked this audience of world leaders is a president of the United States who's called the European Union an economic foe. Europe opposed U.S. decisions to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal and the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF, restricting mid-range missiles, which Merkel called the worst decision of all.
We want to say this especially to our U.S. friends. A treaty originally meant to protect Europe, a treaty for disarmament, meant for our protection, is terminated by the U.S. and Russia, and we are here just left to sit there.
Merkel's frustration was open hostility in the conference's annual report, which accused the Trump administration of, quote, displaying irritating enthusiasm for strongmen across the globe and disdain for international institutions and agreements. That criticism transformed applause for Merkel into silence for Vice President Pence.
I bring greetings from the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump.
He got the same cold shoulder 2 days earlier in Poland.
As we bring the economic and diplomatic pressure necessary to give the Iranian people, the region, and the world the peace, security, and freedom they deserve.
Transatlantic leaders traded pleasantries, but European diplomats said the transatlantic alliance that has anchored global security was losing its grip. Here's how Munich chairman Wolfgang Ischinger closed the conference.
A vast majority is now sharing our conviction that we have a real problem.
And for more on this tense alliance, we turn to two members of Congress, Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat of Maryland, and Republican Representative Jim Banks of Indiana, who just returned from Munich. Thank you very much to you both for being on the NewsHour. Representative Banks, let me start with you. As we just heard, Wolfgang Ischinger said there is a problem, referring to President Trump and the transatlantic alliance at the end of that conference. Is there a problem?
I don't know if I would call it a problem. We were both a part of the largest congressional delegation ever to attend the Munich Security Conference. About 55 members of Congress went, along with Vice President Pence and members of the Trump administration, to assure our NATO allies that America stands with them. But Vice President Pence's message overall was the same tough love this administration has shown since the very beginning to NATO, calling on them to all meet their 2% NATO GDP goals. We met with Secretary General Stoltenberg, who said that NATO has benefited from that tough love of President Trump, and NATO is as strong as ever. So I believe the relationship is as strong as it's ever been, and in the years ahead, NATO can and will be strong and able to achieve what it set out to achieve from the beginning in ways that we haven't seen before.
Senator Cardin, you just heard tough love from the president and vice president. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think this was a European security conference, and you have the President of the United States. Some of his first actions as president was to question the major security agreement, NATO. Then he withdraws from the Paris climate talks. Then he withdraws from the Iran nuclear agreement. And most recently, he changes America's course in Syria without conferring with our allies. I think our European friends see the president embracing leaders that have been on an attack against democratic institutions, so they wonder how reliable the United States is as a partner to defend democracy in Europe. So I think it is understandable that Europe would be very concerned as to what this partnership means in regards to European security.
Representative Banks, the Iran nuclear deal, the INF treaty, As we mentioned before, the Paris Climate Agreement, Syria pullout even the last couple of days, disagreement over detainees that have been caught that used to be part of ISIS. Does Europe have a point when it questions whether President Trump values the alliance?
Well, let's go back to the start of what the Munich Security Conference is all about to begin with. It's to talk about the major issues of the day and many of the differences like the ones that you just mentioned that we have between the United States of America and our European allies. So I found the conference, which by the way was my first Munich Security Conference, to be a healthy dialogue between the U.S. and our partners. I found more agreement with our allies on so many points than I found disagreement, but that's what makes the conference a healthy interaction between us and Europe to begin with.
Senator Cardin, the president's defenders, as you know, distinguish between the rhetoric and the policy, that the president might be rhetorically tough or rhetorically easy on former enemies, perhaps North Korea, Russia, rhetorically tough on Europe, but the policy against Russia is tough. More U.S. troops in Europe, more offensive weapons to Ukraine, more NATO investment, and the president's defenders say a better NAFTA. So the president's defenders say, actually, despite the rhetoric, the policies have improved.
Well, quite frankly, I think the members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, deserve a lot of credit in regards to getting tough on Russia. It was the Congress that initiated the sanctions bill that the president signed and allowed us to take a very tough position against Russia's involvement in Ukraine, their meddling in our elections, their interference in European democracy, democratic institutions. But it was a congressional initiative. It wasn't the president. When you look at North Korea, they don't see results. They see the president giving Kim Jong-un a platform. But as we found out, there's really been no progress made to reduce or eliminate their nuclear weapon capacity. So I think they are just questioning whether the policies are the right policies for our security. They see the tariffs that were imposed against our friends under a national security waiver, and they wonder why you have to use a national security against allies. So I do think they question the policies. And I would admit that the way the president does business really gets under their skin. They like to think that when you're a friend, you'll be consulted before action is taken and not treated the way the president has treated our allies.
Representative Banks, a majority of Germans and French now trust Russia and China more than the United States. Isn't that a problem?
It is a problem. And Vice President Pence, spoke quite a bit about this. And what I thought was the most important part of his address at the Munich Security Conference, telling our allies that there will be a price to pay if they turn to the east rather than the west and partner with companies like Huawei, which is a snake in the grass, posing not just an economic threat, but a security threat, not just to the U.S., but to our European allies as well. So these were important discussions that were had at the conference. They were just the beginning, though. We have a long ways to go to continue to work with our allies in Europe and elsewhere to turn them back in the right direction on many different notes.
Senator Cardin, the U.S. and Europe have disagreed strongly before the Iraq War even. People talked about, oh, maybe this relationship will never recover. It obviously recovered. Why would this moment be different than that?
Well, quite frankly, Europe will not find security with China or with Russia. The transatlantic partnership is critically important for European security and American security. And I think that was the message you heard underscored by many of us to say, look, we've got to increase our confidence between Europe and the United States. We have to invest in NATO. We have to make it clear we will not tolerate the type of activity we see from Mr. Putin in Russia, and that will stand tall against Chinese practices that tried to undermine our own security. I think that's the key message that we want to make. We want to reinforce the partnership between Europe and the United States, and admittedly it's difficult under the leadership of President Trump.
Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, Representative Jim Banks, Republican of Indiana, thank you very much to you both.
Thank you.